Today we have the honor to welcome our Professor Chrimes for this lecture. But just before we start, please join me for 1 minute silence for the victims of yesterday's terrorist attack in Germany. There were about 20 people wounded and about 20 deaths. So please join me for 1 minute. Today we have the honor having Prof. Chrimes for this lecture. His lecture will start with the university's humble beginnings, why the location was chosen in the first place, through the years of expansion, to its significant artistic achievements during the Northern Renaissance. This story will include the glorious King's College Chapel, together with other buildings. He also discusses interesting topics such as the social class of the typical scholar over the centuries, and how this is reflected in the behavior and the leisure part-time of the students, including Cambridge's famous sporting achievements. Moreover, he has stayed in China for 3 months and will share his opinion on the relationship between China and the UK with us. So let's welcome Prof.
Nice to be here. But there are some spare seats here if you want to sit. Anybody? Let's go back to this. You all ready? More seats too? Expensive seats at the front here. Any lecture should persuade, inform, and inspire. So I was thinking how to rise to that challenge with you today. And I think with the persuasion, it's of the relevance of Cambridge to English culture. To inform about Cambridge and its history, I found the inspiration a bit more difficult to think of. Perhaps you can tell your friends what a wonderful place it is, or even inspire you just to buy a book about Cambridge. The lecture you've heard summarised during 2 hours. I don't know if that's how long you want. It's very contrary to English culture. We rarely speak for more than 2 hours, but for more than 1 hour. But I found throughout China you wanted 2 hours. So, Mary, is that really what you want me to speak for? Or? Anyway, well,
yes, we do.
There are various surveys in Western Europe about how concentration disappears through the floor after 20 minutes. So I'll be interested to see how we get on. You've heard why Cambridge, the university's humble beginnings, European medieval education, university's social structure, sports and misbehaviour, artistic achievements, changing modern university, and a few personal observations on China and England. Why Cambridge? Well, the first reason is old wealth. And the richest part of England from 1000 AD to 1500 was the East Coast. And that's because our trading basin was the North Sea. We traded best, and we still do, with Northern Europe, Holland, the Scandinavian countries, and up to Russia. And the trade came across the North Sea into the East Coast, and Cambridge was just behind as a distribution hub. We went south more often to fight the French and the Spanish, and we still do. We're miles apart culturally. And this is the North Sea, and there really is a cultural gap between North and Southern Europe. We have far more in common with the North than the South. And actually it's not that much different, is it, to your country? The wealth comes from the trade, which is all down the East Coast of your country. So there are old buildings in Cambridge before the university, because there was wealth here before. You have the oldest which I hope you recognise, St Benet's. It's a wonderful church, very interesting. I could talk about that in more detail. And you have, as well, the round church. This, on the left, was built in the 1050s, and this in the 1130s. And for 1,000 years, either the town, the university, or the colleges have been wealthy. There's a history of wealth in one place, but also having suffered the trauma of war, and as a cultural centre being stationary. Again, a big contrast to your country. And particularly, we have more old buildings, I think, because we built in stone, where you, for religious and other emotional reasons, preferred timber and wood, which obviously don't last as well. Another interesting comment on the fact that the wealth in this period came in through the east is that the best and most wonderful cathedrals we have in England are all down the east coast, because 1,000 years ago, that's what you did with surplus money. You didn't, like 21st century plutocrats, go and buy vast yachts or football teams or whatever. You spent it on worshipping God. And that is why Lincoln, York, Durham, Ely, Cambridge, Rochester, London, Canterbury, they're all on this east coast. This is where the wealth came in. So, why Cambridge? The first reason was wealth. The next, actually, is monasteries and tradition of learning. Because ever with an eye on where the money was, the church followed the wealth. And the monasteries came to Cambridge. And if you add up here, there are 9 monasteries in Cambridge by the 1300s. And monasteries where the monks lived in seclusion, like your Buddhist monks, and they were not only religious, but they were scholars. So the appropriate trades for an academic community were here before the university. And there was a tradition of learning established, because you quite often, you would really go as much to your priest for prayers and religious learning as you would for academic learning. Why Cambridge? You've got wealth, you've got chance, and the next thing actually is misbehaviour at Oxford. There was an important cleric, a priest called Bishop Wycliffe, who was a forerunner of Protestantism, and that is the big divide between Christianity in this part of the world is Protestant or Catholic. And he, 200 years before we became Protestant, started this movement of Lollardy in Oxford. And because of that, Oxford was not really trusted. And it was thought almost that it was in league with the devil. As a result of this battle at Oxford, the university closed in 1209 for 6 years. And the academics fled to Paris, Reading, because it was on the same river, and Cambridge. And that's another chance, because the leading scholar at that time, a man called Dr. Grimm, you're right, Henry. Right. The leading scholar actually came. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. Mary's a bit upset now. But this scholar came from this area. He was returning home. So those are the reasons why we have a university here from 1209. These college students from Oxford arrived poor with their baggage in a few chests, yet within not many years, less than a few centuries, they were far richer than the rich community they came to. And this was achieved through privileges that they acquired from the church, the International Catholic Church, run from Rome, and also from the state, from the kings of England. So, the reason we have Cambridge: wealth, Oxford, misbehaviour, and chance, Dr. Grimm. Okay, so I've tackled that first point. Now I'd like to go on to the European medieval education and the rise of Cambridge, because at this point Cambridge was nowhere compared to Oxford. There's no one from Oxford here, is there? Oxford was I can safely say then, Oxford was by far the superior university up to the 1500s. It was the only university of international reputation that we had. And these are the ones which I can't do in a minute. Now, just to give you an idea of the university structure in Europe in the Middle Ages, and it went from 1000 AD up to the 1600s here. Now, the states of Italy had 23 universities. That's because each state has always wanted to control education and who had access to education. They didn't want to educate the bad people who they didn't trust. So every state had its own university. Italy didn't become unified till the late 1800s, so it had all these different universities. Likewise, Germany, not united until 1870. France, united after us in England, it still had very strong provinces, and it had these 30 universities, and so on down. Even small Holland, the Netherlands, had 7, and Scotland had 4. We only had 2, Oxford and Cambridge. And that's been immensely significant, actually, for our social structure. Now, the leading universities in Europe at this point were Paris for theology, Bologna for law, because a lot of the trade came in through Venice, and they needed lawyers to settle disputes and draw up contracts. And Oxford was also famous for its law. And the church role throughout was paramount. There's one message really to give you: our education was controlled entirely by the church, and the clothes you wear on formal dinners and all those relate directly to the clothes that the priests wear. And it amused me somewhat to learn from about your reforms of early 1900s in China, when you adopted the kind of European university system. You adopted the clothes that the students wear. So when you graduate, don't you, in China, you wear the gowns and the hats. How many of you realise you're actually dressing up as a medieval European priest? It's ironical, isn't it? Ironical. So, something else that was important. With the role of the church, we had 2 codes of law. We had canon law, which is church law, and civil law. So in the communities where these universities were established, you had a double situation whereby half the population was subject to one set of laws and half to the other. I mean, a recipe for a problem. And it was made worse by the fact that church law was much less harsh. A priest could kill somebody and not be hung. He could be in debt and he wouldn't go into a debtor's prison. He paid less tax. So imagine in Cambridge you had these privileged people with less law and the common people. And in fact, I think it's a little similar, you can correct me perhaps afterwards politely or even now, to the sort of rules that Confucius had separate for scholars. That they weren't punished with physical punishment, I think, as severely as ordinary people, because the assumption was anyway they shouldn't be misbehaving. A medieval university's prime role was to support the church, and beyond that, it was always also to protect and nurture a society's culture. And this was very important. It was passing on the cultural gems from one generation to the next, through the college libraries, through the museums they might have run. And in England, we just had 2 cultural capitals. And this has been the historic role of Oxford and Cambridge. There was no competition permitted. There were 2 universities, one in the late 1200s and another in the 1300s, Stanford and Northampton, which tried to set up universities, and they were squashed. The state didn't want that. And again, contrast it to your country, where basically I understand that your cultural capitals have moved with the imperial capital cities. So you've had all these changes. I think this is one of the prime benefits and lucky advantages that Cambridge have had. We've been in one place for these 1,000 years. I've mentioned Cambridge University was nowhere up to the 1500s. I would recommend a book to you if any of you are slightly interested in Tudor history. It's a kind of popular book. She's won prizes for it. There's a series of 3 about the period of Henry VIII, the fat king with 6 wives whose heads he cut off. And I sat next to a young professor in Pembroke the other day, and I wondered what he thought of this, thinking he might say, well, it's all right for the kind of ignorant people, but nothing. And his speciality with this period. And he recommended his students to read this book because it's so accurate and it gives the atmosphere of that early 1500s so well. And Hilary Mantel, the author, at one point has Cromwell say, the monasteries are moribund. The monasteries are dead. That's the monasteries, the religious houses. All the learned members of our country now are university men, really, Oxford and Cambridge. And he then mentions these 5 academics. They all went to Oxford. Cambridge wasn't producing distinguished scholars at this time. Another example, one of our most famous kings who conquered France, and England and France were united briefly as one country, the Council of Constance, which was arranged by the Pope to kind of sort out religious matters in northern Italy. He's recorded as only consulting with Oxford for the leading professors' views there, that didn't bother with Cambridge. So really Cambridge was nowhere. And yet by the mid-1500s, the whole of English society, for a long period, was run by Cambridge academics. And the four main fields here: church, very famous Archbishop Parker, there's a wonderful Parker Library at Gonville Quays, I can tell you about if you wish to visit. Liberal arts, Dr. Keyes at Gonville Quays, William Cecil at St John's around the government, and the finance, again from Gonville Quays, was an academic called a man called Thomas Gresham. And it's still the case, really, along with Oxford, that these privileged people, English people who come through Oxford and Cambridge, end up in positions of great authority. We had a Prime Minister 20 years ago called Major, John Major, a Conservative after Margaret Thatcher, and a third of his cabinet were from Cambridge, and they were referred to, even in the late 20th century, as the Cambridge Mafia. 500 years after this, still going on. If you're looking for one reason why Cambridge rose, you could actually give King's Chapel. Before this chapel was built, Cambridge was a distant little town with a dismal climate, which you've experienced recently. And out of the swamps and the squalor and the stench arose this wonderful building with magnificent walls, almost of solid glass, and it really put Cambridge on the map. It sucked in the monarchs. It was so expensive that the monarchs who previously hadn't had an interest in Cambridge started to be interested. Why didn't this interest go across to Oxford? Well, they had an investment, a major investment, in a new college and a school, because King's College was set up with Eton College. Have you heard of Eton College, where our Prime Minister and a number of other leading politicians have been set up together with King's Chapel? So Cambridge needed, the government, the king of the day, needed a balance. And the king, in fact, was Henry VI in the mid-1400s. So King's was built. This, therefore, is, I've explained here the rise of Cambridge. Okay? I'll come back to one or two of those points. I now want to talk about the social structure and give you some idea of who came up to university in Cambridge over the 800 years. It started, say in that period, 1200, 1600, by relatively unprivileged people coming to university. The aristocracy were more interested in developing the muscles in the biceps in their sword arms than they were the synapses in their brain. Career advancement depended on who you could kill and who you could defeat in battle. So the people coming up to Cambridge were generally not the privileged. I would class them as the kind of lower echelons of the civil service. The nephews of the priests, the various people who worked in the lower levels of the government who had clever sons. Obviously the poorest didn't have access, but they were still not what you would call privileged people. They came up age 14 and they stayed for 7 years. Everything in Europe took 7 years. To be a master baker, butcher, scholar, and 7 is a very significant figure in our culture. There are 7 planets you can see with the naked eye, 7 days in the week, 7 deadly sins. A very important figure, in fact. That was a situation up to about the mid-1500s. And it was Henry VIII who started to change it. England was emerging then to try and compete with the stronger, richer countries of France and Spain. And we had trouble doing this because the aristocracy around Henry VIII were a bit thick, because they weren't promoted for their brains, just their battle. And there's one wonderful example of Henry Brandon, the Duke of Suffolk, who, after a character called Thomas More was going to be executed for misbehaviour, Brandon wanted this position. And again in Hilary Mantle's book, Cromwell refers to him as half a ton of idiot. Big, strong man, you can't run something with that. So Henry started to encourage the aristocracy to come up to the university. if you could have clever aristocrats, you had everything, as far as he was concerned. That period really lasted up to the 1800s, when again you had more of the middle class people coming up as a result of the public schools. And this lasted till about 1970. Just about it covers me. I applied to university in '69. And at that time, in the late 60s, only 9% of the country's children over 16 went to university. Now it's over 40%. It's a big change. 1970 onwards, access is still privileged, but it is dominated by brains. It's the most intelligent who get in. And in fact, as a result of you women coming up to university, there's less social mobility, because one of the comments about modern universities is that they are marriage markets. And the clever women marry the clever men, whereas before, the men were more likely to marry people from a different social class, and there was more movement. So it's interesting in England, we can't quite achieve social equality with sexual equality. It's work in progress. Now, let me take you back to the 1500s. Imagine Cambridge at that time. And really, founded in 1209, nothing much changed until the 1800s. It was men only, a woman-free environment. Teachers were priests, were unmarried and supposedly celibate. There were no women at periods even allowed to touch the ground of a college, and certainly not to go inside the chapel. If you wonder why English men are a bit odd, you've only got to look at the way they're brought up, because these people, even until recently, were brought up in single-sex schools. You were sent away to boarding school, and women were just not part of it. And if you didn't have any sisters, you had absolutely no idea at all. I mentioned this thing about 7 years. Women were banned. Priests also were scholars, and most of the scholars themselves became priests. And it was an isolated community, and that's why the courts you may live in or know in your colleges you're associated with are all inward-facing. They've got more windows inside than outside. Outside life wasn't important. There was, this was the common people. It's a very introspective community. This really lasted up to the 19th century. And some comments here. It's an interesting one. Teachers were not allowed to marry until the 1870s. So here we have, in Europe, the most ridiculous situation where we didn't allow our clever people to have children. It's equivalent to a sterilisation. You've heard about sterilisation in India, and we're doing this. And I think in your top scholars, and do correct me later, that I think when you had the top examiner, the top candidate was quite often absorbed into the imperial family and married one of the imperial princesses, which is a pretty clever thing to do. It's better than us, because you get the gene pool increased. It's astonishing, though, absolutely astonishing. And just actually on that, one of the examples of clever people was John Maynard Keynes, who you may know of if you're doing economics, a terrific economist in the 1930s. He was the first generation child of two academics who married. So we would have had hundreds of Keyneses if we'd been a bit more sensible. The academics is interesting. Teaching was not a respected profession, and it's still really the case. I think the further north you go in Europe, the more respect teaching has. Teachers actually are being better paid now. I don't think university staff are. They're still pretty low. And I think there's more respect for your teachers in your culture than there is in ours. And this has got a long history. And because of that, there was something in the Middle Ages, this period of 12 to 1500, in this context, where there was a necessary regent system. And that means that every student, people like you, had to stay on and teach if the university wanted them to. Otherwise they couldn't get teachers. They weren't, however, isolated from real life. These teachers came and went. Many of the heads of colleges were chancellors of the kingdom, and they were politicians. They weren't isolated. And that image, actually, where the long service records of the academics could only match their long beards, was just a kind of Victorian myth, and a few Victorians I put up here. And they were isolated, possibly in that period. Again, in this period, they're not isolated, because a lot of them are involved with industry, with the intellectual economy, and there's much more interchange now than perhaps there was in that period. Just to remind you where I've tried to take you, we've sort of tackled those things. I go on to sports and misbehaviour here. And the impact on Cambridge on sporting culture is really immense. And it was part of the ideal of a balanced gentleman who was nurtured at England, and actually I think explains quite a lot about English culture. And because of that, I think we do well at sports relatively to our population. In your wonderful Beijing Olympics, we were 4th. I don't count the Winter Olympics where we don't do as well. Does China? Where did you come in your Winter Olympics? Do you know which position? 12th. It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, we'll forget that. Concentrate on the proper stuff. And then London, you know, the host city advantage. You see, we were 3rd there, and we have no right to be too chauvinist. If I go back just to this. This is from publicity that the university put out. Cambridge graduates shined at the Beijing Olympics, and more than 30 countries around the world are lagging behind us. I mean, it's a load of nonsense. Absolute nonsense. We claim anybody like our Nobel Prizes. Don't believe that figure either. And obviously, when she was at Cambridge, I think in the 1980s, about that, she was doing a PhD on the impact, I think, of the Olympics on culture, particularly Chinese context. Anyway, we claimed her as a Cambridge graduate. You've only got to be here for a weekend in Cambridge. Claimed you a Nobel Prize or an Olympic medal. And actually, they are seriously far more liberal in that sense than any other university. But on regards to sports, there was no sports for the scholars initially, because first of all, they came from a less privileged class where you didn't have any acquaintance with sport. You know, it didn't happen. And the sport that existed, if you call it sport, was fighting. And the colleges, you know, and I've put some samples up here, were split amongst between North and Southern England. And that was a kind of excuse to have a fight against a Northern or a Southern college. There was, of course, fighting with the gown, with the town. You know that phrase, town and gown. Gown is the cloak you wear, so the university was the gown, and the local people were the town, and that was a constant source of fun. The townsman's occupation would have been shooting at the butt, shooting arrows. One of the reasons for England's rise and success in the 1400s was our longbow. That's why we could beat in the French at that time. And every village had to practice. And there are still 2 butts greens in Cambridge today. And the second butts green is the Scholars' Garden of what is now Clare College Fellows' Garden. That used to be the butt green. You had to practice. And you were forbidden from doing things like bowling or more socially exclusive sports unless you had a large income, because the kings wanted to be able to pull in these men who were expert at shooting. The scholars, very little for them to do. Waterfowling, walks in the fens, other than, of course, the fighting. And, of course, the mixing of sexes was forbidden, and there were informal games of stuff like football. You can see one example of this in Trinity. It's a lovely little kind of time capsule to visit. If you go into Great Court, and on the south side, if you can work that out, sorry, the north side, you go through a passage. So Trinity Great Court is here. Through a north passage, you come into this area. It's a lovely little bit with some lovely rooms there. So if you have a friend in Trinity who can get you in to a tour, it's absolutely lovely. Bowling here. And so much, though, for the students was banned. And you may not understand some of these terms, I'll help you, but Pembroke College said no tilting on horseback. That means you weren't allowed to get on a horse and have a great big spear and charge towards another horse. You know, it's a bit odd, isn't it, to ban that. But that's what they had in their college records. Gonville College didn't allow you to bear a bait. You know, we used to put bulls in a pit and put 2 bulls together and 2 bears together, or bulls, and you'd gambled on who would win. You did it with cocks, hens as well, and hunting with dogs. And the next one, Christ College, wouldn't let you keep dogs or birds of prey, and it wouldn't let you gamble with dice. They actually bothered to put these into the college articles, which you can read today. In 21st century Cambridge, anything legal by the national law you can do. It very much wasn't the case before. There were separate laws controlling the university students that really originated from the church. So scholars were here to study, and the theme really was austerity and denial. And this cheerful chap, Bishop Fisher, who actually was it was an immense force of good and great benefits to Cambridge. You can see from the way he looks, not too, you wouldn't choose to go out on a Saturday night with him and expect a good time. Michael House was at college before Trinity College. He founded St John's and Chrimes. He was the personal confessor of Lady Margaret Beaufort, who was this king's grandmother. And he was a bad chap and actually had him executed, and that's a different story. The culture of the university was at this period established by him, and two wonderful quotes I enjoy: a low diet is necessary to concentration. You know, you weren't going to be well fed. You probably don't feel well fed in college these days, but you certainly wouldn't then. And the brain, you see, thrives on cold air, cold rooms, no heating. Very much the No Fun Brigade were in control, and we associate No Fun Brigade with the Puritan movement, which actually a bit later. You may hear the use of it in colloquial English. Puritan means you're very severe, you're not much fun. It was actually a religious kind of term, but there you are. And I put here 5 figures here associated with Cambridge. I mean, they don't look great. This was the atmosphere. The first sport that came in was a game called real tennis. Anybody heard of that? Don't mean lawn tennis with your Nina and people like that. Anyone heard of real tennis? Do you know anything about it? Have you played? Is there anyone here who particularly thinks they're good at badminton or ping pong? Must be somebody, no? Do you have any friends who are good, particularly good at that? I thought they were national sports. Do you have a friend? Would you? Who's good at it?
Yes.
Would you? I'll give you my card. Will you ask them to make contact with me? Because I would like to introduce them to the sport, because they'll be good. It's hand-eye coordination, and I think it would be great to have a Chinese student playing at the university. So I'm a serious point of that. And the reason this was the first sport is because it was the game of aristocrats. Henry VIII, if you see what we call soap operas, you know, the Downton Abbey that's set 300 years before, you see Henry VIII, the shot, playing real tennis. This was the game they played. So to attract the aristocrats to Cambridge, these courts were built. And colleges wanted the aristocrats to come to their college because they came with money. And if they liked the place, they'd give you money afterwards and the rest of it. And because I'm a fanatical tennis player, I just obsessed on this. Corpus Christi had the first court then, and you see the list as it goes down, and these are big courts. Look at the expense of them. And look at all that. Astonishing. No other sport was allowed as this sport. Erasmus, the great theologian from the early 1500s who lived at Queen's College for 3 years, actually used his textbook from which students learned Latin. He used real tennis to give analogies. It was equivalent of Beckham playing football in those days. Another one, I know you Chinese came to invent football. There was an issue, the International Football Association, the IFA don't like the arrogant English saying we invented football. So I'm prepared to admit that you guys kicked a football. But modern football is the result of England, in particular, the Cambridge rules of football. And they were set up on Parker's Piece in the 1860s. And this is Park Street, I think, and these trees, which are not the original ones, determine the size of a football goal everywhere in the world. Because you know if you go on a flat pitch and you put your jersey down there and your jersey there and that's the goal, that's what they did with these football, with these trees. And the width of the goal. I love that. The rules they set up too, again it's colloquial English, but the sort of rules they had, no one may be held and kicked at the same time. You know, you've got to be more subtle. The offside rule, you know what I mean when I talk about the offside rule? So they had an early offside rule, no loitering by the opponent's goal. And there was an established culture of football by the mid-1800s, and I love this, Chesterton, a village outside, was a match in 57, where the scholars had their heads broken with staves and had to take refuge in the river. You know, you see how violent this was. And sport was hugely important in Cambridge. The these football rules, the rugby rules were determined here, and at Oxford, boxing rules, the rules are as a result of a man called Chalmers, who was a friend of the Marquis of Queensberry, and the world over, boxing is fought under what we call the Queensberry rules. They only use his name because he was an aristocrat. The real chap was Chalmers, who was at this college, and boxing and rowing as well. So you begin to have the Cambridge ideal of a gentleman. And there's a book I came across recently called Oxbridge Men, British Masculinity and the Undergraduate Experience. And the sort of ideals really going back to the High Renaissance of Leonardo da Vinci, who was fantastically gifted at everything. So too, we had these heroes. This was an important, terrific cricket player at Cambridge, but he was also a scholar, a diplomat, as well as a supreme sportsman. And the whole idea was not to be seen to try too hard, a bit like a duck going along the river. You may have been doing massive work under the water level, but you were calm and not trying to, not being seen to try too hard. And David Cecil is another classic example. And this was a tradition of what we call muscular Christianity. And the personification of this was an educational reformer in the mid-19th century, Thomas Arnold, who set up the famous school of rugby, and several other famous public schools were created around the same time. And he had an interesting order of priority. In educating boys, you girls didn't have much of a chance at this stage. The first and most important thing was religious principle. What comes next? Academic ability? No. Gentlemanly conduct. And only third, academic ability. It was more important to buy into the moral values of society, and our Christian society, than actually to be that clever. And those sort of qualifications in that order is what got you a place at Cambridge, up to that period of about 1970. And just a personal comment, my own upbringing in the mid-20th century, the status of a gentleman was always held up as an ideal. And being a gentleman, though, wasn't the result of privilege, it was the result of how you behaved, not circumstance. So you could have a man who sweeps the street with no money, but if he behaves in the right way, then he qualifies as a gentleman. It's not necessarily correlated to wealth. And the other thing, personally, as a kind of games obsessive myself, that I was forever being taught, and it probably ruined my chance of becoming a Beckham or whatever, was don't worry about winning, my parents said. You have to behave correctly if you do win. So this was the thing. Don't worry about losing, I should have stated there. Don't worry about losing. If you win, then behave correctly. We have a famous phrase here, I think that goes back to the Duke of Wellington, who was at Eton College, and he, referring to the big battle of the English against the French in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, and he claimed, amongst other things, that battles like that were won on the playing fields of Eton. Sport is so central to our psyche. So misbehaviour. I've mentioned the town against gown, and there are two codes of law. That's an ideal way of creating problems, I think. The proctors and their servants. Are you aware of the term proctors? Some of the colleges, they are really the policemen. They used to be the policemen of the college, and their servants are really now what you call the porters, also known as the bulldogs. And they will try and attack these people. And this phrase is based on Latin. It means people wandering around at night, because students were locked up in their colleges, right up to the 60s. And now you're all having keys to get in. In those days, you were locked out. And anyone outside would be apprehended, particularly, and this is one of the reasons, for college uniform. You had to wear it everywhere, right up to the mid-1960s, so you could be identified as a scholar, and you'd be fined. The porters would have the authority to fine you if you weren't properly dressed. I mentioned the fighting with the town, with the colleges, and then the town jail. There isn't a picture actually extant of it, but there was a place called the Spinning House Jail, which is, if you come from the Cambridge station, railway station, down to town, you walk down St Andrews, on the left, halfway down, above a dull building is a blue plaque, and on it saying, this is the Spinning House Jail. And that one was set up in the early 1600s, and it was where the university locked up the people it arrested, because we had a separate code of law. So the university had its own court, its policemen. It would arrest the people and put them in this jail. And it was an awful jail. And I'm sorry to say, on behalf of my sex, and ask for you girls' forgiveness, that the people we locked up were the young girls of the town, who we thought were corrupting the innocent young men, members of the university. And it really was scandalous. And this jail went on until the 1890s. It's really quite recent. And it was there was a complaint in the Times newspaper that it was a jail not fit for the worst felons. There were questions raised in Parliament about it. Interestingly, the older universities in America, like Brown's, Harvard, and Yale, have their own police force to this day. If you look at, when you get home, if you want nothing better to do, the Yale University Police Force, you can have a career in that field. And that's because the founders, particularly of Harvard, came from Cambridge. All of them. John Harvard, you know, Wizard Emanuel, all the others. And they left with a memory of the police force at Cambridge University. They set it up, and as is so often the case, people who emigrate retain a kind of stronger adherence to what they left behind. They still have this police force. And I was interested in discussing that, I mentioned the jail being closed, with an American, the Harvard Police Force, and you can still plead for forgiveness from the civil police in the state of Connecticut, if you're a student. You can't drink in Connecticut until you're 21. It varies by state. If you're a member of the university, you can drink at 18. So if you're drunk in public, and you can tell the local police, somehow prove with a card, you're a member of the university, you will get away with it. And I find that amazing, that still, in the 21st century, there's a little impact from Cambridge. It's a bit like you guys wearing your academic dress, not understanding where it comes from. I'm amazed that people at Harvard understood that. All these universities in Europe were similar. Heidelberg University also ran a prison, it's Studentenkase, and there's a picture of it here. This is the outside, not a good picture of the inside. But instead of locking up the innocent young girls of the town like we in Cambridge did, they locked up the students. They got it the right way around. And they made the punishment worse of letting the students out to come to lectures. And I think it's an interesting contrast. If you go to Heidelberg, you can still see it as a tourist place. I think these connections are very enjoyable. There was university misbehaviour in the cause of science. I don't know what you did in China to get bodies to dissect and understand how the body worked. In England, we stole bodies. There weren't enough people being hung. Very often, if you were hung, your body was given to an academic community for dissection. More often than not, actually, people dug up graves in London, and they put them on the carriage, and they came up to Cambridge on the North Road. And when you were in a big basket, and there are pictures of it actually, you see drawings, and when you were, people would say it's kind of fresh food, and if you thought it was a bit smelly and going off, it's likely to be in a dead body. And there was a famous character called Lawrence Sterne, who wrote a book I wouldn't advise you to look at, called Tristram Shandy. Very famous book that's kind of quite famous, but a bit kind of uninteresting. I personally think that's a kind of very trendy book to say you've read and like. And he was a scholar, had been a scholar at Jesus College in the late 1700s, fell on bad times, and he was buried in what we call a pauper's grave, a very simple grave, marble arch in Tyburn, North London. And his body was dug up, delivered up to Cambridge, put on the dissection slab for the doctors to chop up. The doctors recognised him, wow. This once famous man, and he was kind of hurriedly put away into a jail. And actually in English culture we have various people, particularly two famous Scotsmen, who were famous for digging up bodies and selling them. Hare and Burke, and that's a little detail for you. The first dissection was Dr. Keyes, he was a doctor, a medical doctor, and then by 1700s, and there was a dispute in England, a legal dispute, actually who owned a dead body. I mean, once it was in the ground and the soul had departed, where's the ownership? And it's quite a complex legal issue, actually. I mentioned Lawrence Stern. There was an example of a riot here because in 1732 the townspeople thought bodies were being taken into Emmanuel College for dissection. They weren't very happy with that, and they made a hot pursuit surge into the college and didn't find anything. And Darwin again wrote, Charles Darwin, you'll know, he actually wrote in the early 1800s when he was a student here, observing the arrest of two body snatchers. So that was a cause actually for unrest. And to my enjoyment, you know the Corn Exchange now? So if you go down towards Pembroke Street, towards Emmanuel, Emmanuel College, that road there, which I think is now Corn Street, Corn Exchange Street, it used to be called Slaughterhouse Lane, and at the end on the corner, which is still occupied by the medics, there was the dissecting theatre. So you were dissecting bodies in a name called the Slaughterhouse Lane. That quite amuses me as a coincidence. And perhaps one of you can tell me afterwards, what was your source of bodies in China? I suspect criminals, I should think, but I'd be interested to know.
I don't think the Chinese did any medical dissection.
Sorry?
I don't think the Chinese did any.
Didn't you? Until when?
Until the Western medicine came.
Really? Until 1900s? So you're telling me your anatomy and that science was very much behind that?
Well, Chinese internal medicine is not based on dissection. It's not based on dissection and recognition of the law.
No, it's interesting.
It's really like how the Renaissance times about the dissection.
So what about today? Is there still dissection?
Well, today I have no idea.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good point. Yeah, thank you. Another source of misbehaviour were trade fairs. Cambridge was famous for trade fairs because of its position. The same reason it was good in the 1000s as a distribution point, it was good for access. So we had all these famous fairs, and I saw one the other day. There was a marriage fair at the what we used to call the Garden House Hotel, Doubletree or something. There's still a tradition of fairs. You see on Midsummer Common there are fairs. It's still quite a long-term thing. But this was one of the most famous fairs in Europe. Started in the 1300s or 1100s under our bad King John and lasted really up to the 1700s as a very major European event. And it's referred to in English literature. Daniel Defoe, you may have heard of John Bunyan in Pilgrim's Progress. Cambridge was in the Valley of Humiliation. And at all times are seen jugglers, cheats, games, fools, apes, knaves and rogues. There was a lot of misbehaviour. Thackeray in Vanity Fair, wonderful book, talks about a very vain, wicked, foolish place, full of all sorts of humbugs, which is kind of silly people, falseness and pretensions. And some of you may live, perhaps, in these streets. Do you recognise these street names? Any of you live in those names? They are named after the old stalls of the market. These were temporary stalls that were up there for 3 weeks, but every year they would come back. So they became known as Cheddar's Lane, where I would imagine you bought cheese, Garlic Row, you would know, Oyster Row, Swan. And the Wrestlers' Arms is still a pub, I think on the Newmarket Road. It rather looks an unattractive, modern pub, but its name is still the Wrestlers' Arms, and that will come from this ancient fact. Another form of this behaviour was night climbing. Have you heard about night climbing? There's a wonderful book actually by someone who wrote Whistlesnake or something. And you see here, and in researching my book, I spoke to one member of John's. I spoke to one member of John's College in the 1930s, who on the morning of his final examination climbed up the St John's Tower. We have a slightly different kind of approach to our final examinations today. It's quite decent. And the most recent time, about 10 years ago, when two students climbed up one of the pinnacles at the east end of King's College Chapel, right above King's Parade, and they wrote subsequently an open letter to the Vice-Chancellor complaining about the stonework, the little crockets, the little hooks. They were worried for the safety of their successors. This was rather a nice kind of cheeky question. Generally, there isn't much of this behaviour, though it does give you a respect for drain pipes. Just have a look when you're going round, because there are some you can get your hands round, which is what you need to do, and some that you can't. And the famous one you may have heard of, the Senate House leap, which is Senate House passage between Gondolin Keys and the Senate House. It used to leap from one side to the other. And there's that book, if anyone's interested with the name, it's full of pictures that make me giddy, make my mind turn just to look at them. And there's, oddly enough, no record of anyone being seriously hurt. There's occasional broken arm, broken leg, which I find amazing. And here's another one. This is the top of the west end of King's Chapel, and that's a chap called Craig. I mean, it's amazing. They're wearing clothes like you and I. They're not, brave and dangerous. Riots, generally a thing of the past. The most recent significant one was 1970, when, because we didn't like Greece at the time, or students didn't, it was being run by a right-wing dictatorship, and there was a tourism week going on at that big hotel with Doubletree, and there were some riots, and it was quite nasty in as much as it's felt that the porters victimised in court with evidence the students, and the students suffered. And I met the best friend of one of them, actually, who was sent to jail. And the youth jail in those days was called a Borstal. I don't think we still have Borstal. But he got the first from prison in his third year. Generally, we don't bother, we don't have riots now, and I'll come on to why. The last one, the Foster Law Building, you may know, well, very near here, just that way, no, that way. And the Senate House a little bit in 2010. But the reason we don't have these riots is the university holds the whip hand. When I was at university, it was free. There was no cost. Nowadays, for most people, it's costing a huge amount of money, a bit less than it cost you, but still a bit, a lot of money, £40,000 for 3 years. If you then come out of university because you've been sent away after 2 years, still with a lot of debt, you're not going to get a job. So the risk of misbehaving is much higher. And that's why I use a whip to give you the example, really. Life has become too serious. If you're being put into debt to be learning here, you're not going to mess around. In my day, it was a bit more fun, a bit more relaxed. Yes, students are more serious. This is another point, actually. Selection is entirely now on academic merit. Whatever you may think about it, still Etonians who get in because of privilege. It is true, but it's really based on academic merit. I say it's true because they've been to much better schools that have smaller classrooms and better teachers, possibly, who are paid more, so they get better results, in part because of privilege, but it's only based on how they do in exams. But the result of that, you only have people here who are here on academic merit. They're less broad-minded people. They have what I've heard referred to as less of a hinterland, less other interests. They don't play the viola or hit a good tennis ball or run fast or sing. And intellect is everything. I think that's a bit of a shame. And I think a sad example recently is only last year, these choral singers, before you had a good pair of lungs, you could sing beautifully at King's, John's or Trinity, the best singing colleges, and you'd be given a scholarship, which would be a small amount of money, but would give you a place, and then you just kind of get through the academic bit. Now they've said, officially from the Vice-Chancellor, no one can be given a choral scholarship until they first got an academic place. Now, I think that's really tragic, because the wonderful music quality that we have now, over time, will go down. I think some allowance should be made for the wonderful viola player, or the people who can sing. It's long since the sportsmen have long since been disregarded. This is because the university is increasingly seen as serving the knowledge economy. And you're far more likely in future to have a graduate of Cambridge or Oxford becoming another Bill Gates than you will the Prime Minister, because generally people who end up running our countries, whether it's yours or ours, are broad-minded, broad-educated people who have good emotional intelligence, are able to have other interests. And I think those people will come from the second tier of quality universities in England, which we refer to red brick universities, the places like Bristol and Durham, Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool. And I think the nature of Cambridge is changing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. We need a strong knowledge economy. And I think Cambridge is increasingly providing the foot soldiers through PhD and postdocs to help the knowledge economy, and less actually to help our nation's culture. It's called progress. My personal plea actually is why you are here, to do other things than work. I mean, you know that you Chinese, to us, fairly or unfairly, have a reputation for terribly hard work. And certainly when I was in China, I heard these horrible stories from mothers saying they made their kids work till 2 o'clock every morning, you know, awful. I would just keep a balanced life, because I think this focus just on academic achievement is not in the long-term interests of either you or your country. That's a summary. What have we got to? It's done an hour. You all right? Want a break? I thought I'd talk about King's Chapel a bit, specifically now, before the last few things. Artistic achievements, immediate impact, I think, in Cambridge is visual. When you come, you see these wonderful buildings. I've just put a few of the ones we have known and love here: Queen's College, Richard Johns, yeah, thank you, and the Senate House, and that lovely building, Redlands, library, gorgeous, and some mathematical science, modern buildings as well. I think they're terrific. And just to let you know that the architects who built these buildings were the very best we have in the country. The Senate House, a man called Gibbs, also did St Martin's in the Field. This is Trafalgar Square, an old picture of Trafalgar Square. The National Gallery, some people don't like it, I think it's a good building, he was criticised for it, is built by the same man that built this side of King's Chapel. I mean, the very best architects built here, and still built here. There's not an architect in England, perhaps, in the world, who wouldn't like a Cambridge project in his portfolio. They can attract and do attract the best architects. And Cambridge architecture is English architecture. There's great age, going back 800 years. There's huge variety in the display of skill. There's tolerance and deception, I'll come back to. Chance and recycling, and messages to the soul. And let me start with this engineering achievement. This is the oldest building in this part of England, and certainly in Cambridge. St Benet's Tower, classic Norman building, wider at the bottom, getting thinner. They didn't know how to put windows in walls without compromising the integrity of the building, so all they did, the original ones, were those two little holes up there, and they're right at the top, and out of solid stone. They're probably made for birds of prey, like an owl, to come and eat the mice. And in this period, there was a crusade of cathedral building in Europe. Europe was getting rich. It was moving from the city-states to nation-states that wanted big cathedrals. And there were 90 cathedrals built in that period. Number 82 out of 90 was King's Chapel. And I call it a cathedral because that's what it is in all but name. Look at the engineering ability. They couldn't put windows in there, and they're putting a 2,000-ton roof on top of virtually solid glass walls. Amazing advance. And you can see this history with a lovely stone vaulted ceiling. And we have variety. Look, you've got the oldest courtyard at Corpus Christi. You've got, I think, John's College, Queen's College, modern here, Newton, Murray Edwards College, and the education faculty. And there's a huge variety. Just make the point here. One little vista across of the CAM. You've got Clare Hall, 1600s, West End of King's Chapel, 1400s, and Fellows Building, 1700s. All side by side. And it's a characteristic of English architecture. We don't flatten everything. We accept buildings from different periods. And I'll come back to this point. And this is it. We have a tolerance. So in close proximity of Queen's College, you have these buildings, which is from the 1400s, 1400s there, and there, and you've got 1900s, 1900s, 20th century there, all within one area. And this was also because the wealth of our nation was focused on Oxford and Cambridge, not divided into 23 universities like Italy or 15 in Germany. So we had the top quality of architecture, the top quality of museums in, first of all, the college libraries and then Fitzwilliam, which you see here, and the quality of scholar. We got the best, and the influence of its graduates, because these people generally went on to run the country. Tolerance as well within single buildings, because this is a Norman tower from the middle 1000s. The aisle on this side, the southern side, is 1400s, and this side facing the street of St Benet's is Victorian. We just put them all together. It's actually very common in England. Westminster Abbey is full of different periods of building. Hampton Court, the same. It's not what the French do. Notre Dame, main cathedral in the centre, Basilica of Saint-Denis in North Paris, all built in one style. The French thought they'd found the ultimate design of decorative Gothic. Gothic architecture is essentially French, and when they came to decorative Gothic, they said, that's it. Knock everything else down, we build in this one style. We haven't done that. And I personally think that both reflects English character, it's a bit of a compromise, you know, we'll give and we'll take, and also I think it's personally more attractive. King's Chapel has other symbolism, and I'm going to show you here the footprint. This is King's Chapel, but before that chapel was built, it was full of people and buildings. They were cleared. It was, you know, people were paid to move, but I'm certain there'd be no alternative. The price wasn't right. You know, you would move. The king wanted this area. It was a project from the crown. You were turned out. So it shows the power in a community of a university which is backed by the king. Just briefly, architecture does put more than a roof over your head. And in the wonderful phrase by William Ruskin, buildings should also speak to your soul. And I put this little square around here of this college quad, which I think actually is Oxford, I'm not sure. But you can see it's all very much inward facing. There's even a building, I think, by Henry Martin in the next door street, which is west, that way perhaps. What's the street that way? Anyway, belonging to Gonville Keys. And you look, it's red brick, built in the 1950s by this architect, and it has virtually no outside windows. It's all about inward-facing communities, feeding off each other. This is the theory. And also, Trinity Great Gate. Imagine the privilege you feel as a student of 14, 15, being able to go into Great Court when the other common people can't enter. And your buildings too carry messages, so there's nothing new in that, is there? Deception. One of my favourite buildings in Cambridge is Jesus Chapel. This is the East End from inside. And I just want to show you with these slides how it's changed. This is how it looked when it was built in the 1100s as a church for the local community. It was then taken over by the university in the late 1400s, and they knocked that wall out and put a big window in like this. And this is a sketch, a drawing of that. Ooh, that's my 1 hour. You all right? There's panic in the kitchen at home now. There's no their alarm clock. So in the 40s, late 1400s, they put in this window there, and they put in a steep roof like that there. In the 1800s, 1700s, 18th century, they put a flat roof in, what we call classified it. Took out all the old pews, put in new pews, which are not there now, and did that. In the 20th century, 1800s I should say, they did this. They put it back to what it was like then. You've had all these changes. And when I first went there, and probably the first 10 times I went there, I thought, what a wonderful, fantastic place. Hasn't changed a bit for 800 years. There's a huge amount of substance. And it's obviously so, because these buildings wouldn't have survived otherwise. But I think that's a wonderful example, and I just put those there to show you the difference in Gothic architecture between the four-centred arch, which they have at King's Chapel, and the older windows, which is a three-pointed arch there. You might wonder how these expensive buildings were funded. Largely through the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church had a number of tricks they used to persuade people to give money. And I use the word with purpose to say tricks. This end of a round building, which you see at St John's, if you go down Trinity Street, technically St John Street, John's Chapel sticks out. It's rounded, based on the French architecture you see at Saint-Chapelle on the Ile de Paris in Paris. And it's rounded because, not in this case of John's, but usually they put little chapels up there and they dedicated them to saints. And they persuaded tourists, visitors, to come and worship there because they had an ancient bone from a saint or Jesus and give money in return. So they took money from the common people under pretences and then actually used it to build buildings. And there was tax. The church sold religious offices. So if you were a priest, you had to qualify by coming to Oxford and Cambridge, but then you could buy a place, and you bought it because the income over a period would be more than the price you paid for it. And you could be a very bad person and commit sins, and you go to church, you tell the priest about it, he'd say, oh, that's a very bad thing you've done, but if you give me £100, I'll let you off. That's how they collected money. And the final way, which was actually the most powerful, was the fear of purgatory. Now, purgatory was the antechamber for heaven. If you were very, very bad, you went straight to hell, that was it. Most of us, we believe, went to purgatory, where you had your soul cleansed. You couldn't have weak, bad people like us going straight into heaven. And you could spend up to 9,000 years in purgatory if you were very poor and very bad. But if you were rich, you could have an expressway through purgatory to heaven. And I laugh with you, but this is what people believed. And they gave money to build the chapel, and then extra money for the people to say prayers for your soul. And the more often prayers were said, the quicker you get into heaven. And this was absolutely believed. And that is why the old chapels of your colleges were built, solely for that reason. So the richest people could get up into heaven before the poor people. I think we're right to laugh. This is the basis of much of the wealth of the Catholic Church. I want to emphasise again how the universities in Europe were so closely tied with the church. And there was this big battle, which would be the subject of another interesting talk throughout Europe, particularly in England, between who had the power, the church run from Rome or the individual kings in the country. And it was a particularly strong issue in England, because we always wanted to be a bit better, a bit different to the rest of Europe. I've just given you an example here of its purgatory business. In case you haven't quite understood this ridiculous view that some very bad went to hell. From earth, you generally went to purgatory and then up to heaven. Very few would go straight into heaven, and that's there. And you'll see here, King's Chapel, because it was so rich, could be built immediately. And in fact, it had two churches. If you go into the northern entrance of King's Chapel, the north gate, on the left there's a bit of grass. There was another big chapel built there that fell down after 100 years. So it was building two chapels at the same time. Other colleges, like Peterhouse or others, had to wait to attract the money. And just another comment to show you the privilege of King's. It was always treated differently to the other colleges, and it only accepted scholars from one school, Eton, right up till the 1860s. Now, the scholars who went to Eton again in the old days were very poor people. The rich were educated at home, the aristocrats. So it wasn't always the kind of pinnacle and symbol of privilege, which it now is in 21st century England. And they didn't have to do an exam to get into Trinity College until the 1860s. And they didn't have to do an exam to get out the other end with their MA. It was just given to them. Astonishing. And actually, the reforms we had in Cambridge education and Oxford at that time were based on your Chinese system of examinations. So it's nice to have this two-way flow, because there were two civil servants called Redcliffe Maud, not Redcliffe Maud, got it wrong, we'll come back in a minute, but they went out to China, one of them, to study your imperial examination system, which was open to all. And this was a classic system of what was going wrong with the university. You couldn't get into it. And they had open reforms which were based on what was then perceived to be your very successful imperial examination system. And these chapels, just to remind you, you'll know them all, I hope. And if you don't, do go and visit them. That you can walk in, you don't have to be invited or pay any money. you've got your card with you, and they're all absolutely lovely. This is the round one at John's, the round end that I was talking about there, St John's. King's Pay, I'm telling you this wonderful chapel, gorgeous with the glass lit up. And I do want to emphasise the importance of universities in our culture. They provided the chords of national memory. They preserved the culture and passed it on from one generation to the next. And I think that's amongst the most superior of the motives for having a university, to have these non-teaching aspects to it, the way that they're telling the next generation, passing on the best of what's been learned before. Again, this contrast I'm providing, Oxford and Cambridge, stationary, no battles here, compared to your moving cultural capitals in China. Yeah. And they've been our custodians of culture. I just thought I'd touch on we haven't always had a Fitzwilliam Museum. That's only been founded since the early 1800s. In England, the earliest custodians of our culture were the monasteries, again the church. Then it became university colleges, and the libraries were where the academics who went travelling in the summer would come back from Greece with a fallen pillar and coins or whatever, and it would be stored there in the college libraries. And gradually, the libraries have given over to the Fitzwilliam Museum, and there's still some antagonism. Fitzwilliam has a wonderful coin collection, and as does Convent Keys, and there's a bit of kind of antagonism. There's obvious sense in having all the coins together at the Fitzwilliam, and that's what's happened. But Convent Keys were a bit reluctant, to let their little mini museum be submerged into Fitzwilliam. And Fitzwilliam really started as a private museum, a bit like the Ashmolean, with rich individuals. And then in the mid-1800s, we had what we call national museums, founded through the state, such as the Victoria and Albert and the National Gallery and that sort of stuff. But it really has been one of the university's main roles. I want to move towards King's Chapel itself here. Just remind you how lucky we are to have the glass. Early churches didn't have windows, a minimum amount of windows. And this was largely because they were poor. They had been illegal. The church was only legalised in 330 AD by Rome. Before that, it had to be kind of worship underground. They weren't used to displaying their wealth and their beliefs. And also, as the origins of the church are in hot countries, you didn't want windows. And this is typical. You've then got another example of Fens church in the centre of France. No windows at all. In Rome, you've got the Sistine Chapel, the inside I've given you here. The outside of it is very modest, with very tiny windows. It's about internal splendour, in part because of the heat. And I give an example of a cathedral I know well, you should live there in Florence, the Duomo. And look at the amount of windows, hardly any. Because it's terribly hot in Florence. The last thing you want is the heat. So because of that, the southern part of Europe, and the oldest part of the Christian church, didn't have stained glass as an art form. And much was dark, actually. Even our homes, the homes didn't have windows. They were very expensive as well. And the Duomo there was finished in the 1400s, not long before the King's Chapel was being built. And this is what I wanted to move on to, the glass. This is the east window. It tells the Christian story, which I won't trouble you with. But what I will share with you is much else. It's got numerous other messages. It shows, for example, the prejudice against women and Catholics and Jews. In those windows, there's a whole lot there, which I'm happy through Mary or someone to take some of you round. It's telling you the story of English life in that period they were built, which is, in this case, the glass was done in the early 1500s. And the prejudice against women, again, it goes back to the comments I made earlier about Englishmen being a bit difficult with women. And we have a huge dichotomy because at the centre of our religion, Mary is the most important saint, the mother of Jesus. Yet at the same time, women provide original sin. They're the origin of the problems of mankind. And we've got this kind of dichotomy and we're confused. And here you have a scene of just above the north door of Mary, of the devil here being tempting Eve with the apple. It's the origin of sin in Christian belief. There's a bigger picture of the devil. And note the devil is in female form. Your devil is without a specified sex, I think, generally. In European culture, it's always male. Always, almost. And here you have an example. So, all women were dangerous. Give you an example, in the census of 1801, the first population census we had, there was just over 800 members of the university. 3 women somehow slipped in to the circle. I don't know who they were, probably the Chancellor's wife or something. This shows you what kind of male only, what environment it was, and what a strange environment it is. And still, I knew well the master's wife of Jesus, and she would still kind of exclaim at how odd most of the fellows were in this kind of community. You know, just kind of bizarre. I don't know, you may have personal experience, but she is a kind of normal woman from outside. So I just can't believe how some of them still behave. You did, though, have women being educated. One of my favourite pieces in a side chapel, the King's Chapel, is this woman. She's actually German, the original. It dates from the same period, but it's not original to the chapel. And there you have a woman showing herself as educated, reading books, and I'll give you a big picture of her in a moment. Prejudice against Catholics. It's not showing up very well, that picture. I can't quite work out what it says. Let me... Oh, here we are. I can see it better here. You have the devil in one scene on the north side of the chapel, shown in male form this time, but actually in the form of a Roman Catholic priest. So you're showing the Protestants at saying those bad Christians over there are in league with the devil. It's crude propaganda. Another example here, you have the story in the Bible of King David, the shepherd boy, David, going into Jerusalem, having killed the bad Goliath, and that's the giant. You see the big head, and that's the sword. This was a symbol for the Protestants cutting off the head of the old religion. And now in Europe, Christian Europe, we look at the Arabs and say they're very aggressive, they're fighting, but the symbol for Protestantism in the 15th century was a sword. You know, how aggressive is that? And incidentally, David in the Bible was a poor boy, a poor shepherd boy looking after sheep, but he's dressed here, you can't see very clearly, in wonderful clothes as a Renaissance prince. He's showing you actually how the rich would dress at the time. So it's a wonderful source of knowledge there. And this also is a prejudice against Catholics. Another one actually here. Prejudice against Jews. Jews are the other form of Christians, and the Christians believe that the Jews killed Christ, and they're showing the people with looking ugly. So it's kind of anti-Jewish. And it's still an issue in modern Europe, you know, prejudice against Jews here, and you see they're shown in kind of bad light. Tudor life and fashion, I've mentioned the king here, but David, future King David, dressed as a medieval prince, not as a shepherd. You've got Mary, who again was a poor wife of a carpenter, dressed as a princess. So you can see how the rich were dressing in those days. And you can see also interesting things like headdresses, what you girls were wearing for latest fashion. In England, when someone called Queen Mary was on the phone, we wore the Spanish headdress with this corner here. We then had the round French-style headdress, which came from France. And then we moved on, as it happens, to Mary Queen of Scots, a slight variation. So you can see all these things. But this French style, Anne Boleyn was French, and she was the second wife of Henry VIII. You can see in the window there, I hope there's another slide coming up, no, that she's wearing that picture there comes from that window. So you can see the latest fashion. I've put this here because glasses, this is a scene where the doctor here is wearing glasses. You can see slightly bigger there. That also shows the glasses were being introduced. They weren't around, they weren't invented 2,000 years ago when the Bible was being written. So it's showing you what was happening. And there are many other examples, which I'm very happy to share with you. It shows also the Tudor insecurity, frailty. They were a new king, a new dynasty. Like you had your violent change to the dynasty, we did too. They won their throne in battle in the late 1400s. So they had to tell everyone about it. And in King's Chapel, their symbol, which is the Tudor rose, the red rose here, it's got 94 of them around. I love the fact that someone's been around counting. Certainly not me. I'm a Cambridge obsessive, but not that bad. Portcullis, you know those big gates that come down in front of European castles. Do you have portcullises like that in China? That sort of gate which had holes through it? It's a European thing. Yeah. 53 of those. A hawthorn tree, another symbol of this dynasty, 70 and so on. It's full of propaganda. And it also actually tells you about the political philosophy of the time. Before the chapel, the church was the only patron of arts. Holiness lay through beauty. Still fundamental of the Catholic Church. You make things beautiful because that leads you up to God. It's a belief of Catholics, not of Protestants. The artistic techniques, though, then were limited, and they supported this idea of scholasticism. In contrast, humanism came along, really from 1500 onwards. I've made a mistake there. And that emphasised free will. God hasn't determined what is going to happen to us. We have free will to determine what we can do with our lives. And this is fundamental to the Renaissance, the change of European culture at that time. And art forms changed. There was more realism. There was the focus on individual free thought, actually going back to civilisations that flourished before Christianity, in this case Rome and Athens. And you can see this, and I'll show you some. Let me give you an example of the influence of the Renaissance on King's Chapel. One of the things that new humanist art was they didn't like vacuums, empty space. Ancient art, you may have noticed if you go to the early Renaissance gallery in Fitzwilliam or in Italy, you have a saint's head surrounded by a bit of gold painting and almost nothing else in the picture. And then imagine you're in that Catholic church. It's dark because there's no lights, it's just candles. And you're praying in front of this image, lit by candles, and it's quite an emotional experience, very different to the Protestant Northern Europe experience. And we didn't like this sort of art, so we filled every corner with pictures. So you've got from King's Chapel 2 windmills, lots of windmills, very windy place, Cambridge, you probably realise, and have windmills there. You have this drawing here of Jesus Christ, and let me show you that there's a spider there. So you didn't leave it blank, you put a spider there. Next one, look at this rabbit, is there, I think. There. See a rabbit there? I'll turn it up. And there's another one, there's a cat there, I think. So you're filling the areas. If you look at those graphs, look at the detail, it's really quite fun. There are others with ducks in them, little kind of flowers and things. And here's another little drawing. And I took some pictures recently from the museum, from King's Chapel, of some others. They don't want plain glass, so they show a hen here. They show some sort of goat. These are all from, that's a grasshopper, you know what a grasshopper is? And another picture of a pelican plucking its vest. So you can see lots, you see changes in art coming through. Pictures of saints. Really want to put this. This is dates from the late 1400s. It's in a side chapel, first side chapel on the left as you come in. It's not actually original to King's Chapel. It was put in the 1970s. But apart from the fact it's a lovely bit of art, it shows you the position of women. And this is what I wanted to show you. It comes from Cologne, a monastery that was shut down in Cologne by Napoleon, and eventually the glass was brought here to us in the 1970s. And you see, women were educated, but they were educated at home. It was proximity of men to women that caused the problems within university. And we're still in a single-sex college here, and this is the residue of that. But this woman is writing. She's obviously learned. She's got a book. Time, you see what we call an egg timer. Did you have those in China, you know, to measure time? Do you see that? Yeah. You've got medicines up there, more books, I think, up there. Look. And it also shows you how she lived. You see, it's not very clear, that's a bedroom there. And you've got perspective. You can see what shoes she's wearing, you see the fashion of it. It's just lots of information you didn't get from that early Renaissance picture of just the saint's head. It's a real advancement in European art. And you've got realism. This is the oldest window in the chapel, more or less above the north door you go in, and it's rather lifeless. There's no action there, and certainly most art before in churches was rather lifeless. But other glass that came later in King's Chapel has got much more emotion, much more realism. Can you see that face, the weeping mother of Jesus? Jesus' body is down here, and there again, look at it blown up. There's real human feeling there, which you didn't have in these old saints, which actually reminded me a bit of your eight immortals in your Buddhist temples. I mean, they're not realistic, are they? I mean, they're a bit, I didn't relate to them in the same way I don't relate to the images in old churches. I can relate to this sort of image, and there are more here. These are bad people, but you see there's emotion there, there's character being sketched. I want to show you the influence of the rest of art, the art world, on England. England was not very advanced in artistic terms. We're rather heathen. We're Protestants, not proper Christians. And our art establishment was much smaller because our ruling elite have generally been less interested in art. And still today, you can find the President of France, when Sarkozy, when there was a wonderful Impressionist exhibition at the Louvre, he would be on television saying this is a great exhibition, go and see it. You never have our Prime Ministers doing that. You see them playing tennis, riding a horse, but generally our elite have been pretty uncultured. And we've borrowed art from the rest of the country and copied it, or we've imported foreign artists. We didn't have a well-known, successful artist in England until the 1700s with William Hogarth, whose pictures you can see in the Fitzwilliam. Before then, our king's painters were Holbein, or Kellner, or Van Dyck, Leahy, all Dutch. If you had money to spend, you wouldn't waste it on an English artist. And this is King's Chapel as well, because what I wanted to show you here, sorry, the picture, I think it's because it's too much light from the window, but this is the Last Supper, shown in one window in the King's Chapel, and it's the long table horizontally turned that way. And it's a direct copy of the very famous picture that Leonardo did, but also one of Van Elst. And in Van Elst's painting, he's got more life here. You see there's a dog, you see there's a woman serving, and a stool being pushed over by the man who betrayed Jesus, who's called Judas. And Leonardo's picture is much more plain. I hope the next slide will show you, not at all clearly, but what you've got here is a stool. It might make a difference. That is a bit better, isn't it? Yeah, thanks. Thank you. So you can see a bit of a stool there, can you? Not very well. Believe me, there's a stool like that there, and it's been knocked over, and Judas is there. It's a direct copy of this wonderful painting. I can show you some more. Michelangelo now, so we had Van Elst and Leonardo. Michelangelo in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, right above you, almost in the middle, shows a female devil. Very rare in Christianity, as I said. This is a copy of that. At least Leonardo had the decency to include Adam, the man, in the picture. We don't even in Cambridge have that. We just said it's all you girls' fault. I've gone for ages about these pictures. Jura is another one. This is the Great East Window. I'm going to look at this picture here. It's got 6 scenes, and this one is where Christ, the Son of God, is nailed to a wooden cross. And I want to show you there is some detail, and that is a direct copy of Jura, the most wonderful artist from just before 1500, and that is one of his. In the small passion, he wrote a sequence of 10 or 14 art stories about Christ. You see the body there, you see the identical thing there, showing that England was reflecting what was going on in Europe. But actually, it makes you think that King's Chapel is a 16th century art gallery. And shortly, I'm hoping to go around it with the new director of the Fitzwilliam to discuss this with him, show how really we have yet another art gallery. Forget the religion, just look at it from the art point of view. And it's fantastic. Raphael, another one. This is, again, not very good pictures, but these are the tapestries from Raphael that hang round the Sistine Chapel, one of the glories of Western culture in Rome. And two of them are directly copied into windows on the south side of King's Chapel. So we've got all these artists up there. That's another of them there. And these actually, I could spend longer on this. We've done an hour and a half. We all right? Anyone awake? Sorry? Short break. Mary says a short break.
5 minutes break.
5 minutes.
Food and snacks are provided.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So, just summarising King's Chapel, it's an iconic building. When you stand in that chapel, you're standing where every leader, every king, queen and leader of our country has stood for the last 600 years. It's one of the most recognised buildings that we have in this country. Thank you, Apple, for that. Been on that. Libraries, again, part of it. I'm going to go through this more quickly. Illuminated manuscripts, very important. Just interestingly, on this, again, this university keeping the records of our culture. It's not just English culture. We had a professor, an academic who went to the court of the Khan in 1254, and there was a big debate arranged by the Khan between the Christian, the Buddhist, and the Muslim to determine which was the best religion. I think the matter was unresolved. And we've got a massive amount of Chinese material in the library. That fantastic collection of modern Chinese art you may have heard of recently was given to Oxford University about 2 months ago. Shame it didn't come. Needham, I was at the same school as Needham, oddly enough. And I'm ashamed to... Have all of you heard of Joseph Needham? Yeah. All of you heard? I tell you, you could be in a group of similar educated people who were English, only about 3 of them would have heard of him. He's not big in England. It's interesting. Chemists have heard of them, people like me have been to the same school, and a few others. It's absolutely astonishing. Just on that, when I was at PKU, I went around about 15 universities speaking, and I was asked to speak in PKU, and I mentioned that we had the oracle bones, some oracle bones here. And one of the girls, after, in the question, stood up and said, "Why have you got those oracle bones? They should be here in China." What would I say? Otherwise, people were very friendly, but that was it. Okay, I'm just going to go through this couple on Britain. Move on here. I've got some things to say. Come from the English gentleman I've mentioned. Did any of you lot enjoy Downton Abbey? Yeah, it's this sort of thing that's placed here in Cambridge. Gentlemen's clubs, there's an Oxford and Cambridge club in Pall Mall, central London. 2 universities, I won't dwell on that. The role of science, critical in Cambridge. And one of the reasons Cambridge's reputation for science is based on the Cavendish. Because before that period, that's kind of 1870s, so right up to that period, to be a scientist, you had to be very clever, but you had to be brave, because the Catholic Church didn't like you saying that the Earth moved around the sun. And you also had to be rich, because there was no money, there was no patronage. And the Cavendish was the building that allowed people to come and study, mainly as postgraduates, who were poor and would be paid by the university. And the first example there was Ernest Rutherford, who did the artificial disintegration of the atomic nucleus there. And that really kick-started and produced Cambridge's dominance. Before that, okay, we had people such as Isaac Newton, but that was more by chance, and Charles Babbage of the computer, and people who discovered the circulation of blood. It was the Cavendish that laid the foundation for modern science. I put that there, clever, wealthy, brave, some of them there. And again, before that, we did have these scientists, and this is a nice phrase, Francis Bacon, there's a statue of him in Trinity Chapel. If a man will begin with certainties, he shall end in doubts. But if he will be content to begin with doubts, he shall end in certainties. And this is the new approach to science, is you examine the evidence first. Very different to Aristotle's beliefs. You start with an open mind. That was here. Isaac Newton, we know about. The Cambridge tradition. This is possibly at risk because, and this is a joke in the newspaper, the humour is that increasingly companies will pay money for you to research, provided you just stick to what they want to find out. And the best research in Cambridge, like Rutherford, has been the result of what you call blue sky thinking. No one told Rutherford what to do. He did it naturally, and the danger of money coming from the government or private companies is that you'll restrict them like that. That's just a comment. You know about the Cambridge phenomenon, there's close links here. Again, we're punching above our weight in terms of international studies. Cambridge still does very well. I hasten to add, it's in large part due to people like you. It's not just English people, obviously. Half of the Nobel Prizes won in this century have come from people from other countries. But what Cambridge still has, it may lose it, we have to be careful, it still has an ability to attract clever people like you. Because it's a nice place, I hope you think, to live. There are nice buildings, there's a tradition. But we mustn't be arrogant and think it's always going to be here. Student experience is different. I've been through this, you know all this, I won't dwell on this. I'm going to get through to something at the end here. Conclusion, the impact of Cambridge, it is huge on our culture. If you want to understand English culture, understand Cambridge and you've got it. Our architecture, our cultural heritage, how present society works, the people, the leaders, they've all been through Oxford or Cambridge. And Oxford is just the same as Cambridge. Slight difference, essentially the same. We have, therefore, a homogeneous ruling class. They talk the same language. One example is that when we have a coalition government, they're saying it took a weekend to negotiate because Clegg had been to Cambridge and Cameron had been to Oxford. The Italians, bless them, a lovely place to go on holiday. It takes 6 months to get a coalition, and then it lasts 6 weeks. And it's the result of our elite being moulded in one or other of these two places. Science, we mentioned, sport traditions, it's a world-class university. And it really is like this analogy. It's like a wax tablet on which is written our last 1,000 years of history. Go on from here. 31 outstanding. And the last quote from I Always Liked from Cicero in Cambridge is absolutely right. It's full of gardens and books. If you have those gardens and libraries, you have all that you should need in life. Lecture summary, it's going to go on now. We're going to finish the changing module quite quick now. I think the challenge is, it's more academic. You're cleverer than people in my day. I'm not sure that's a good thing, though. There are more people from other cultures, you guys, and you obviously know the largest ethnic group now. There's much more research. It's much more closely relied to industry and the knowledge economy. It never was like that before. It was allied to government, civil service, the church. Had to change. The problems, the challenges, is how to integrate people like yourself. They are trying better, particularly the postdocs. There are something like 3,500, some of you postdocs? Yeah, and there are 3,500 of you. And I'm pleased to say, at last, they're embarrassed by the fact you haven't been included as you should be. And they are doing a lot about it now. You remember do you ever go to the visitors and MBS? No, you don't. They are trying, and I think it's important that they do. What's the role of colleges now? Are they just a tourist attraction? And what's the point? Because so much more is based on faculty. It's quite an issue. And the finance and independence. There's a shortage of money. They're very rich in reading the papers, the colleges. They are, but they also have, on the other side of the balance sheet, immense responsibilities. And in proportion, I can tell you we have the fifth of the wealth of Harvard and Yale. Oxford is slightly poorer, about the same. You know, it depends how you value the assets, but we are relatively poor. And the heads of houses, the masters of colleges, regularly go out to Asia every year with a begging bowl to see kind of rich Hong Kong-based or Beijing-based people. So that is an issue. So we're going down here, just really briefly now, some of my observations, which you're welcome. I mean, why do I have an interest in China? Which historian can't be interested in your fascinating country and its history. I mean, that's fundamental. And also, people of my age, I'm mid-60s, were cut off from your country for so long. We had no knowledge. And I ask you to be slightly kind when you keep reading the bad press about China and England. It's awful, it's inaccurate, but part of it comes from the fact that Mao removed you from our consciousness and just left us with a very single, narrow image of you women and men wearing the same Mao clothes, which I incidentally saw in Yunnan and Sichuan. The peasant women were still wearing those Mao, those Mao, well, I think of as Mao suits, this blue denim. But we were left with no knowledge, and when there's a vacuum, prejudice is left to fill it. The other thing was the wonderful exhibition at the Fitzwilliam 2 years ago. Were any of you here for the exhibition? Do you think it was good? Yeah. I thought it was outstanding. Absolutely outstanding. That was fascinating. And the third thing was The Economist, which, who reads The Economist? Anybody? It's got the best Chinese section. They've got a very good journalist. I think very fair and accurate. Do you think? Tell me if you disagree. Sorry?
I think very subjective.
Very subjective. And what would your comment be?
Quite local stories.
Yeah, I think it's quite good. It has to be subjective. We're all subjective. That's not a criticism.
That's how stories sell.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's much fairer than the rest of the press that you see about China, which generally I think is ignorant and not worth reading. I love this picture. This was the other reason why I tried to find the publisher of SDX in Beijing. This was a map showing the Chinese tourist perception of Europe. Okay? So you guys like to gamble. Any keen gamblers here? Anyone know that? Okay, roulette wheel in Monaco. Suits. This is what the typical Chinese tourist thinks of. This was a survey in 2010. Suits over Italy, wine over Spain, a nice lady's handbag, Louis Vuitton over Paris, bit of culture over Germany. You love the music, don't you? Over England, one word, Cambridge, and the willow trees that Zhu Jun wrote about. So I said to myself, well, hey, I've written a book on Cambridge. There must be interest.
Why is that Buddha statue on the
I don't know, I didn't understand that.
I thought it
A bit of subjective reporting. I don't know, why do you think
Buddha
that?
has, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know what it was. It doesn't fit in with my story, so it might ignore it. What were my impressions? Just simple ones at first. Mountains were everywhere. It must seem very flat to you, this part of England, and England everywhere must be flat. From Beijing all the way down to Yunnan, the Himalayas, it seemed mountains were everywhere. Good weather, by the way, I was there from early September to early December, nothing but good weather. 1 week in Suzhou where it rained because there was a monsoon somewhere nearby. Apart from that, literally fantastic. No Japs or dogs. I say this with humour. Is Ludong province up to south of Beijing, isn't it? Yantai. Which province is that? Shanghai. And I was taken by Ludong University people into this restaurant, which was a nostalgic restaurant for the 1950s. I mean, it's when I was growing up. So they gave you cups and things like I remember at home. And outside, in Chinese, was written, no Japs and no dogs. I loved that. It was a reference, of course, to the many horrible things the Japanese have done to your country. And it was a lovely restaurant, and this was a reference to the fact that the Japanese presumably said no Chinese, no dogs. Incidentally, the equivalent of that is English, is no Irish and no dogs. Anyways, but amusingly, you couldn't do that in England today. We have a kind of a racial equality board, and you'd be in jail. But I liked the open humour. It just struck me. The drinking culture in northern universities. I mean, at high table in colleges, it's very little drinking, isn't it? You guys may drink more than that. And there was quite a lot. And at Ludong, for example, your big round tables before or after my talk, and then there was this kind of drinking, and it looked you in the eye and say, you have to finish it. And I made the mistake of drinking wine and a small spirit, and they had weak beer, which I didn't think was fair. And there was a woman next door to me, my only woman there, and she didn't like it, like my wife, she doesn't drink much. And I said, what do you think of this? And quietly said, I hate it, but this is the culture. It was quite chauvinist, to my surprise. It was fun. I mean, I enjoyed it. Friendliness at that dinner and others. There was much more talking between the people waiting, the waitresses and the people there. Now, if you look at high table, there's no communication. The food comes down between you, you talk cleverly to the person next door. There's no communication. And I thought it was a very nice communication there. And also, when I was kindly taken around whichever city by the university with the chauffeur and another academic, the chauffeur always joined us in the posh restaurant, smart restaurant for lunch. Lovely. I couldn't talk to him, we did the sign language, but you no way you have that. If you have a visiting Chinese academic, well, he'd be lucky to get a car because we're too poor, but if he was given the car, no way the chauffeur would come with you for lunch. And I thought that was really nice. Cultural variety, of course, it's a huge, you're the equivalent of Europe with all the variety we have. Food I liked. Bit of trouble in Sichuan. Not very good on spicy food. 2-hour lectures. You never do that here. It's an interesting one. Am I right? Do you think of a typical length of a lecture in China to be 2 hours? It's not here. I was astonished. And they didn't want breaks like Mary kindly gave me. And the other thing is, and I say this with humility and anxiety, it's your knowledge of us. Okay, I was an elite who spoke English and had been educated very often in the West, but what you knew, I met people studying Gothic architecture who could talk with me about 19th century English literature, who knew about our politics, and the opposite level of ignorance amongst most people here is astonishing. Now, you've been encouraged, I think, to acquire this knowledge. Again, I do blame Mao for that period. We would say, no, we're not wanted, so we've turned somewhere else. But the knowledge now is dangerous. And I use this term not with purpose, because I can't be a better one, but if you want to defeat your enemy, first understand them. Now, I'm not saying we think of each other as enemies, but you know so much about us. I think it's scandalous how little we know. Do you know how many people there are, English people studying Chinese at Cambridge today? Have a guess. Any one time?
About 30.
62. Not bad. I understand, every student at university in China must spend 2 years learning English and passing the exam. We're crazy. Crazy. I'm actually working, do you know this place, this company? Financial main thing. You've heard of that or not? It's Financial Reporter, a financial reporting company. And I've got a friend who works there, and they're doing a project to understand how China is portrayed in the West. And I hope to be part of it, so that'll be interesting. And also, do any of you read The Independent? There was an article about Cambridge recently, and the journalist happened to be a friend of mine, and I was included in the article along with the Vice Chancellor. And she's going to do another one on the Chinese in Cambridge. So I may be getting your picture. My next writing project is I'm going to try and do something on China. What I want to do is go back for 6 weeks next few years in autumn where I may get good weather. And sort of thing would be, a Cambridge gentleman in 21st century China and take, say, 15 provinces and some of the people I know in each province and do like a peasant farmer in Yunnan who showed me around your villages and an academic in Beijing or a financier man in Shanghai and write down and understand that province's recent history, say 3 generations, on the macro scale and try and weave it into the individual stories that family could tell me. And I'd enjoy it if it sells a lot. But I think SDX might be interested, so those are my future visits. Now we've almost ended. You've had the lecture, this is the commercial. You can buy a book in English for a mere £15. And what do I do here? Yes. What is this? Oh, with my signature for no extra charge. You have a Chinese version. Apple clever all this stuff. £15 for you, £10. Trouble with this, it's a little bit cheaper at home.
Yeah.
40 Beautiful. You must hate the price of the meat. I'm sorry. Now, are you under pressure to go home to your families with the great souvenir from England, from Cambridge? You are. I've got the answer for you. It's this year's must-have fashion. It's the Cambridge umbrella. I have it here for you. A horrible price, but it's £22 in the shops. And you can't buy it in China. But I have it. And that's it, I finished. I wanted to give a present to Mary. Where's Mary? You can choose which one you have. Well, if you wanted to come, I don't know, if someone's done something wonderful for you, then have the other two. The other two is one of Zhuxia Mortstone, Xu pronunciation, and one of Confucius and Clare Avenue. So you're very welcome to, if you've had someone who's been very helpful or whatever, or you can do what you like.
Thank you.
But thank you for